What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my class overview for the Sorcerer in Baldur's Gate 3. Continuing to go through the classes before launch, today we are talking about the Sorcerer. And while this will be a bit specific to Baldur's Gate 3, it will of course kind of serve as a guide for 5th edition D&D as well, simply because that is the system the game uses. But we're not going to be diving deep into the math of anything here, but more talking about the class fantasy on top of things like the general mechanics the class uses that make it unique. The math of these things, if you will, I will save for the relevant build videos. When it comes to talking about a sorcerer though, there's a few things that set them apart from other casting classes that we'll go over in this video that ultimately make them one of the more popular ways to play a spellcaster in 5th edition D&D, because a lot of their mechanics center around making the spellcasting as fun as possible, even if they are a little bit limited in what they can cast in comparison to, say, a wizard. But first and foremost, let's talk about the class fantasy of a sorcerer. What actually sets them apart from a wizard? Well, where a wizard learns their craft through arduous study and practice, a sorcerer has an innate magical talent. This can be from a variety of things, and where it comes from specifically will make up your subclasses. One of the most common versions of this, if you will, is a draconic bloodline. Somewhere in your past, a dragon has gifted your family with some essence of its very magical nature, which has then manifested down the line as you, someone with an innate connection to magic just the way dragons have it. But while that is certainly a popular way this can happen, it's really just the tip of the iceberg, because a sorcerer can gain this ability simply through a strange twist of fate or a significant event that they went through. So while many might be born with this talent, it is possible for you to come into contact with it later in life, just as an example. So where a wizard uses study and practice, a sorcerer is more about a natural instinct for magic. So naturally, when it comes to role-playing a sorcerer, a lot of it comes down to how did you obtain the power that you have and what do you plan on doing with it? And because of the nature of how you are gifted or potentially cursed even with this power, can lend itself to some very chosen one style of story. Moving on from the class fantasy though, a little bit of general information about sorcerers is that they are charisma casters. Rather than using knowledge to cast their spells, they coerce and will their magic into existence, or maybe they even persuade the universe to do the things they would like to do, which naturally makes charisma their primary stat. When it comes to proficiencies, however, they get next to nothing. They have no armor proficiency, and they are only proficient in a couple of weapons such as daggers, slings, quarterstaves, or a light crossbow, because as you might imagine, they rely very much so on their magic, or at least in most cases, which we'll swing back around to later. But from there, I want to talk about the subclasses that will be available to us in Baldur's Gate 3, which will then form our Sorcerous origin. Now in early access, we only have access to 2 of these, but on the full launch of the game, you will have access to a third one known as Storm Sorcery. But let's start with the most, I would say, iconic Sorcerer origin, which is the Draconic bloodline. First, you have to pick which type of dragon you hail from, so to speak, which means you pick the color of dragon that is related to your bloodline. This corresponds with an element. The element of these dragons will be used for a lot of the subsequent class features that you'll pick up from this subclass. For starters, right at level 1, we get Draconic Resilience, which makes your character a little bit tankier, which can be a nice offset for your inherent sort of fragility. But then at 6th level, we'll pick up our Elemental Affinity. Whenever we cast a spell that deals the damage type of our type of ancestry, you get to add your charisma modifier to its damage, essentially making the spells you cast of the same damage type that much more powerful. And you can also use this to potentially gain resistances as well, using sorcery points, which we'll talk about here shortly. Now there are other draconic bloodline features, but those are what you're going to get in Baldur's Gate 3, as we have a level cap of 12 to work with, and the rest of it comes later there. Another, I would say, common sorceress origin is wild magic. Wild magic is quite a bit different. It can actually be considered more of a curse than a blessing in many cases, but essentially, be it either just a sheer fluke or coincidence, or a fey creature playing a prank on you, you have been gifted with wild magic. Magic that is born from chaos naturally. This can be very unpredictable. Every time you cast a spell, there is potential for something else to happen, which are called wild magic surges. Now, the extent of these random effects and exactly what they can wind up doing in Baldur's Gate 3, we don't know the full scope of yet, I would say, but it is very much so a tangible effect that can happen when you cast spells that can either be helpful or potentially detrimental. In either case, though, we still get class features associated with this. For starters, we get Tides of Chaos right out of the gate, which allows us to manipulate the forces of chance, essentially, to give us advantage on attack rolls, ability checks, or saving throws, which basically means we have a better chance of actually succeeding at them, though typically this particular ability interplays a bit with the wild magic surges, which will be interesting to see how that gets implemented overall. At 6th level, though, we pick up Bend Luck, which allows us to spend sorcery points on either helping or hindering a creature on those same parameters, but instead of advantage, they gain a 1d4 bonus or detriment to whatever they happen to roll for them, just allowing you to influence the fate of everyone else. Last but not least for Baldur's Gate 3 subclasses, though, we have the Storm Sorcery. A sorcerer with this subclass gets their innate magical talent, so to speak, usually from the plane of elemental air to some degree. It's also potentially just the result of you being born during a particularly vicious storm that infused you, a child, with natural magic. Or maybe you're descended from a being that deals with elemental air like a djinn. This particular subclass has a lot of potential in Baldur's Gate 3, though, because of a house rule Larian has implemented where targets that are wet actually take double lightning damage. So if you're willing to set some stuff up, you can use Storm Sorcery to devastating effect. Right out of the gate, though, at level 1, they pick up Tempestuous Magic, which allows them to move a certain amount of feet on their turn without provoking attacks of opportunity, allowing them to get out of the way, basically. And then later at 6th level, whenever they use lightning or thunder damaging spells, you can cause a creature nearby within 10 feet of your choosing to take extra damage based on your sorcerer level, with it being like an extra arc of lightning out of your body or something, that kind of thing. So unsurprisingly, if you really want to lean into lightning and thunder damage, Storm Sorcery is the way to go. And again, given Larian's house rule, it can potentially be devastating. Now that is the subclasses, but let's actually talk about what makes a sorcerer unique otherwise in terms of their spellcasting, because beyond a sorcerer's subclass, mechanically speaking, they're actually a very simple class to play. Unlike other casters who typically have to prepare their spells in many cases, such as a wizard or a cleric, sorcerers can just cast what they know. As you level up, you'll gain access to more powerful magic and the slots to cast them with, meaning you'll be able to cast more and more powerful magic as you level up, without ever having to prepare it or worry about whether or not you sorted out your spellbook for the day, so to speak. But this does come at a small cost. Sorcerers know less spells overall than a wizard does. Now, in a game like Baldur's Gate 3, this really isn't going to come into play very much, but a sorcerer's spell list is a bit smaller than a wizard's. Basically, what they can learn is more limited. But again, where the game's cap is just level 12 here, it's unlikely to cause much of an issue in a game like this. But that leaves us with the most interesting part of being a sorcerer, which is their font of magic feature, or their sorcery points and metamagic. Starting at level 2, you'll pick up sorcery points, and in Baldur's Gate 3, you actually get access to metamagic right away as well, whereas in D&D, normally you get access to the metamagic at level 3. In Baldur's Gate 3, you just get both right at level 2 because it makes sense. Basically though, sorcery points are a resource for sorcerers that they can use to do one of two things primarily. Either convert them into extra spell slots, allowing you to cast more spells without resting, or you can use them to cast metamagic, which are effects that you can add on to spells, with the roleplay of this being that sorcerers are so naturally in tune to what magic truly is that they're able to alter the foundation of it slightly, which allows them to provide extra effects, like being able to cast spells farther, being able to cast them without hurting the people they don't want to hurt, or potentially even casting something twice with the same spell. Metamagic is what really sets apart a sorcerer from everyone else because they can do some truly devastating spell hits with these, especially if you're just leaning all the way into a blaster caster or a damaging spellcasting build. That said though, mechanically that's pretty much all they've got going on. All their eggs are sort of in that one basket. But nonetheless, that unique mechanic does allow them to do some pretty unique things like alter what is already a very diverse list of spells. And this is in addition to the normal upcasting pretty much every spellcaster can do, where they turn lower level spells into more damaging ones by using higher level spell slots to cast them. Sorcery points, however, are regained on a long rest. So you do have a limited pool of these to work with that increases with your level. Typically you'll have as many sorcery points as you do levels. So because of all this, when it comes to actually playing a sorcerer, they make amazing primary spellcasters. They also make very easy to play spellcasters because a lot of the more micromanagey things associated with something like a wizard have been taken out of it. You can cast spells without preparing them, you can alter them in fun ways to do devastating things, and really just focus all in on just absolutely obliterating things. And it's because of that that sorcerers are so popular as a spellcasting class. But it can be a little more complex if you want it to with the addition of multi-classing. I would say there are two very popular ways to multi-class a sorcerer that allow it to do a couple different things. These are mixing it with a paladin or a warlock. By mixing a sorcerer with a paladin, you gain access to a lot of defensive features you wouldn't have otherwise, like armor proficiencies, alongside better weapon proficiencies and extra attack if you take paladin all the way to level 5. And if you're using a melee with that particular mixing of classes, it will allow you to use these sorcerer spell slots as fuel for a paladin's divine smite feature, which can have some fun effects with other sorcerer abilities. And then another popular option here is what is called a coffee lock, which is a mix of sorcerer and warlock. The reasons this is so popular in the tabletop version might not be as effective in Baldur's Gate 3. Basically, by mixing these two classes, you get access to the sorcerer's sorcery points, which lets you create spell slots, and then a warlock's pact magic comes with extra special spell slots that can then be used to sort of fuel this, because warlocks can replenish their spell slots on a short rest, and this can sort of feed into an infinite loop of spell slots in the tabletop version. But in Baldur's Gate 3 there is a 2 per day short rest limit, which is going to put a bit of a damper on the ridiculousness of it otherwise, but I imagine even in spite of that it's likely to still be popular. So there's some ideas when it comes to multi-classing a sorcerer. However, ultimately, a lot of people enjoy playing a sorcerer because it is a very straightforward, simple spellcasting class that can do some devastating amount of damage, with the skill ceiling really being around when and where to use your metamagic to get the biggest effects possible. But ultimately, it's a very straightforward class that can pull off some really big damage without excessive abilities or min-maxing to get you there. That said, that's pretty much going to do it for this video. Like many people, I'm a pretty big fan of a sorcerer, precisely because of its very straightforward approach compared to something like a wizard. But I'd love to know what you think about the class, which you can let me know down below, which of course means to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.